Hello and welcome to Autology, the weekly podcast that brings you the latest on automotive technology. This week's episode centers around the future of automotive recalls through OTA or over the air. And you're here with me, Anna Buettner, along with Hemant Sikaria, co-founder and CEO of Sibros, and Brian Rhodes, Associate Director for Connected Car and Vehicle Experience at S&P Global Mobility. Hello to you both, and thank you for joining this week's episode of Autology.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Anna. Looking forward to this
Yes,
podcast.
yes, likewise. So I'd like to start with you, Hemant. For our audience that is spread pretty wide throughout different aspects of the vehicle, who may not be close to OTA and are unaware of Sibros, can you give us an overview of who Sibros are, please?
Absolutely. So, Sibros is a connected vehicle platform, and it's a SaaS solution that has a cloud and a firmware component to it. So, we can control and do software updates and collect data from the vehicle, as well as perform remote commands and diagnostics on the vehicle. And we do this with an end-to-end platform, starting with a front-end web portal where you can send commands or do other things with the vehicles or a fleet of vehicles, which then talks to our backend, which is running on public cloud infrastructure like Google Cloud, and then talks to the in-vehicle firmware, which then performs the software updates on all the components in the vehicle. So a typical vehicle may have anywhere between 50 to 150 different components that have software on them, and we can manage to do software updates and collect data from all of those components. Sibros is 4 years old at this point, and we have about 125 employees and about 15 different customers spread across Asia, Europe, and the US. And that's about it.
All right, very good. Thank you for setting the stage here. So let's dive into some other questions here. We've talked a number of times on Etology about the opportunities OTA will bring, but this episode is all about recalls. So let's start with the title of the episode. Are recalls really a thing of the past?
I would say that today there are still quite a few recalls happening for both hardware and software reasons on vehicles. And one of our goals at Sibros is to help bring the number of software related recalls down to zero, and also to help mitigate or reduce the chances of hardware related recalls. And I can give a few examples in the future, but those are two areas that recalls typically happen. And I think we have a good potential to eliminate one of them.
Yeah, so it's a good point here. The looking at the difference between those hardware and software recalls. Even if we just look at the software side, this we see a lot of press releases on this of growing number of recalls are software related, and actually the explosion of overall recall numbers. A lot of this is tied to the growth in software. So right now we have around half of recalls that you track, certainly in the U.S., are software based. And I think there's a lot of examples that show, recent examples that show the problems we still face today, and if not a solution for tomorrow, at least the potential where a solution could certainly make an impact. So, I was looking through the news and I saw, added a few of these announcements together. So in May of this year, there was over 450,000 vehicles that were recalled due to a software glitch in the stability control system. In October alone, there was 120,000 vehicles, recalled due to a transmission control unit software issue, another 75,000 in October for a digital cluster freezing, another 200,000 for a problem with the rear camera software. So, a lot of these recalls it's an expensive proposition, right? And a lot of these coming from new functionality that wasn't even on the vehicle before and certainly, software based. We also have some examples on the other side of kind of public examples of recalls that were done over the air. Certainly, Tesla has been a leader here, right? They've been in the news. Just a few months ago, September, they recalled over 1 million vehicles because of an issue with the the automatic window reversal system. So that's probably not something we expected to be an issue a decade ago, but they did this completely over the air, right? So over 1 million vehicles, you can imagine the expense that would have been if this needed to be a physical hardware bring into dealer. Not a good example in Tesla case, but the traditional model. Um, Ford similarly in June had a pretty public one with the Mach-E, and there was an issue with the vehicle's battery contactor, and this was another thing they were able to account for over the air. So not a ton of vehicles. There's not that many Mach-E's on the road. Certainly in June, there were not that many, but the fact that you see the kind of a traditional automaker being able to handle this with, Mach-E's a very significant launch for them from an architecture perspective, right? New software architecture on that vehicle. You do see some of the potential for what can come even with this explosion of recalls in the near term from the software perspective.
Brian, actually, that brings up a very good point that I wanted to clarify. So today, when we talk about recalls, there's actually, when I think of recalls, I think of a vehicle going in to a dealership to get the problem fixed. But like you mentioned, recalls don't necessarily have to mean that they go into service. So while Tesla might be doing a lot of recalls or Ford might do some recalls, if they can fix it over the air, that is the critical piece. That is the most important aspect of this. So when I mentioned that there won't be any recalls in the future, what I really meant is that there won't be software related recalls that require a vehicle to go in to a dealership to get the update. Those updates will be delivered over the air. So in that sense, recalls will still continue because software will continue to have bugs and new features will need to be added. But at the same time, those recalls can be serviced and fixed over the air.
Yeah.
Ver- Very
That's
good.
that's a great point. The reason why this recall conversation is so interesting, obviously there's a huge safety ramifications to some of these issues, right? And that becomes issue number one. But also the cost associated. So I think a lot of times when we're thinking about recall, we think about the cost of the actual problem that needs to be fixed. But yeah, to this point of, needing to find the owners of those vehicles and where they are and bring them into the dealer and, schedule that time and potentially if it's some lengthy repair or something, the inconvenience factor, but also do you need to give them another vehicle, while the car's in the shop? And it's a lot of things that add up to significant liability from an OEM perspective that this is why I think this topic is getting so much attention now, and the potential to do this over the air in the future is really one that's gathering more eyeballs than just in the space of the connected car, where maybe it did before. This is going beyond into other aspects of automakers and suppliers from a cost mitigation perspective.
Mhm.
Very good. Yeah, thank you for clarifying here. So, yeah, then speaking about the eradication of these particular recalls, what prevents this from being a reality today, and why can't this be solved while OEMs design their next generation of vehicles?
It's a very, very good question. So there are a couple of reasons. In a modern vehicle today, there's software not just on sort of big components like the infotainment system or the powertrain systems in the vehicle, but also in the latches that open and close the doors. And these latches may also have buggy software, and I've seen this personally. And that can be hard to fix over the air today. And there are a multitude of such examples of things that have software but are not actually updatable or not updatable reliably. And this is a combination of supplier related issues as well as the automaker not prioritizing or pushing their teams or their suppliers to make all of this software be updatable.
Yeah, that's a it's a very good point. I think also, so beyond, you mentioned what prevents it from being a reality today. Obviously, we do still have a chunk of the sort of traditional recalls that, the hardware-based ones that you'd expect to continue. Just talking about on the software side too, there are some advantages that are coming, that are kind of, unrelated, but then at the same time very related. So, for instance, moving to electrification does open the door for architectures that are designed a little bit more holistically. So we see these launches from, we mentioned Ford and Volkswagen and others that are using the opportunity to shift to an EV platform and consolidating a lot of the what was previously discrete ECUs and a lot of the content in the vehicle that was its own computer plugged in together, and now that's being designed with sort of a domain-based approach. So you've got the autonomy section here, and you've got the cockpit section here, and the body section here. That combination does open the door for making the ability to touch the vehicle after the fact over the air a lot less complicated. It gives a lot more opportunity here. A trend like electrification, again, we're not moving in this direction because it makes OTA easier, but it is one of the advantages here that I think naturally we're going to start to see as more and more of these nameplates that have been announced start to hit the road.
Totally, Brian. Actually, I want to add that definitely on EVs, it's a lot easier to do software updates because one of the big constraints on a combustion engine vehicle is that you cannot just turn on the vehicle to perform the software update and have it go back to sleep because it is releasing emissions and it might be in someone's garage or it could be unsafe to turn on the vehicle. Whereas in an electric vehicle, it can be turned on in the middle of the night to perform the update and then go back to sleep. The one thing that's common between EVs and combustion engine vehicles is that all of the electronics in the vehicle is running on a low voltage battery that is separate from the engine and it's separate from the big battery that's moving the vehicle. So that small battery in an electric vehicle can be powered by the big battery and make sure that it doesn't die. But in a combustion engine vehicle, the other challenge is that the battery may only be able to sustain keeping the vehicle awake for somewhere around 20 to 30 minutes before the battery gets drained. And so in that situation, the combustion engine has to turn on, but it cannot be turned on if the user is not there. And hence the upgrade may not complete in time or may have other timing related constraints that might make it more unreliable to do a software update. And so that's also, Anna, going back to your question, one of the other reasons why you don't see this on as many vehicles today, because the majority of the vehicles out there are still combustion engine vehicles. Now, on EVs, Brian, as you mentioned, there's some advantages and some scope to reduce the number of control units or ECUs in the vehicle and to consolidate them into domains or into sort of the zones where the ECUs are in the vehicle. And those might lead to further simplification of the overall complexity in software updates.
Yeah,
Great.
it's a really great point you make about this also gets to the consumer experience, the end consumer, the owner of the vehicle and what the OTA update means to them. I know a lot of OEMs struggle with this today with a predominantly combustion fleet, but we've talked to many OEMs that have kind of ranged from how much inconvenience can we put on our customers to then get the benefits of these OTA updates, meaning if they have to sit in the car, how long can we reasonably keep them there, and how do we communicate to them what's happening and why? Two, should we even bother with this? Because the next generation is going to be electric anyways, and maybe this is a problem of the past. That obviously does not apply to the entire market, right? This is a shift towards electrification, not flipping on a switch. But yeah, I do think that's a huge aspect here. So glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and actually it's more expensive on a combustion engine vehicle to do a software update because of these reasons, where you need to either have a bigger battery or you need to have more sophisticated prediction that your low voltage battery is not going to die when you're performing the update, and you only have a very small window of time when you can perform the update. Personally, I have a electric vehicle and a hybrid, and uh, the hybrid vehicle has been recalled a couple of times now, and I would rather sit in my car and take a phone call than to go to the dealership, check it in, get a loaner vehicle, spend a couple of hours, waste
Yeah.
all that time, and then go back and pick up the vehicle. So if the automakers are listening, I would rather have that experience, at least for me personally, than, but I can't speak for
No,
everyone else.
no, that's a good point, and I think that does get to the kind of matching of ambitions from the automaker, because certainly this recall topic is a big one, but a lot of ambition for what can be done for OTA, and yeah, it certainly becomes sort of picking your poison, a limited poison for your consumer to accept from time perspective now, that maybe in the future, you know, maybe that poison isn't so strong.
I mean, we had 5 Subarus in our family. We've downsized to 2, and we're planning on getting rid of both of them. So, the automakers definitely should be considering putting software update capability now before they lose more, customer and consumer confidence, because the EV revolution is going to take some time, maybe 5 years or 10 years before it's, the switch is flipped and there are more electric vehicles than combustion engine
Sure.
vehicles.
Very good. Thank you for sharing these insights here. Definitely learning here along the way, listening to you both. And let's kind of switch gears a little bit here. What about security of these vehicles? So we talked a lot about how these recalls are done and so forth, and ECUs switching to domains. Doesn't all this advanced connectivity leave the door open for cybersecurity issues to cause much more harm?
Brian, you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. I it's definitely a concern, right? It's for sure, I think a top of mind issue, and it's not a new one, right? We've seen a lot of examples through, just traditional, let's say, limited connections, the telematics based connections, where we had very public examples of some white hat hackers that shut down a few vehicles to kind of point out some flaws in systems before. I think a lot of complaints you would hear from the industry was how disparate the the approaches to handling cybersecurity have been. And I think I would echo those complaints myself as well, to be honest. So some of the I guess the benefit of sort of this explosion of connectivity is there is also regulation is beginning to follow. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. As for a lot of regulation in the space of the vehicle that we're talking about right now, it typically starts through UN, and we have WP29 coming with some cybersecurity standards that I think are, uh, if not as wholly inclusive as everyone hoped they would be, they're at least finally providing some sort of guidebook to work off of, that every automaker and, of course, the relevant suppliers are going to need to follow. Now, one sort of advantage versus other regulation we followed that goes, Europe first, then maybe it's Japan, maybe eventually it's North America, and there's kind of this lag here. Um, because of the way that automakers are managing these fleets, it becomes quite difficult to design something like the software underpinnings to these platforms for one region. You can customize the application layer and the consumer facing layer if there's preferences of different features and things, definitely. But makes it easier to kind of just, okay, this is the European standard. Let's apply that to this global fleet. That obviously doesn't apply to every vehicle, but it does apply to quite a few. So I think that's one of the things with all this explosion in connected features. We are finally seeing some standardization and regulation start to follow.
From my perspective, to add to what Brian is saying, I think the WP29 is a big step forward because at least all of the automakers that are going to sell in Europe have to think about security and in a deeper way. And from our discussions with almost every large and small automaker out there, I can tell you that the good news is that that is really top of mind for everyone in these organizations, because they are very worried about sort of safety and eh, and all the other repercussions sort of to their brand, to the end consumers. And so this is a top of mind issue for everyone, which is fantastic. Now, I actually feel that it's not necessarily the over the air connectivity that poses as many problems as it is the 0.5% or less of vehicles that, even though they are capable of getting software updates over the air, they just happen to be in remote areas where there is no connection. And those vehicles do have to either be brought in for servicing, or uh, someone has to fly out to help fix issues there. Now, on the flip side, you could say if they're in a remote area where there's no connectivity, then there's no challenges with remote hacking of those particular vehicles. But on the flip side, you could also argue that if there's a way for those vehicles to connect at some point, maybe they connect every 3 months, but they don't have the latest software, which means that they are more susceptible to getting hacked, then that is a bigger concern. And they might only regain connectivity for a small amount of time where it's not enough to push a software update, but it is enough for someone to be able to compromise the vehicle. And so in those kinds of scenarios, automakers today rely on much less secure mechanisms to send software updates to these vehicles. And they do that by shipping USB keys to the owners of these vehicles. And that is a big risk and a much bigger challenge to control the security, because now you have more than one way that the vehicle can be connected to. And that poses a real issue. So, from a security perspective, I do think that a lot of things will happen over the years. And there are a lot of other things that we have in our lives that have safety implications as well, that are connected via software and connected to the cloud. So, it's a matter of just bringing that rigor and regulation to the auto industry.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Sounds like the industry is on the right path, but still outstanding issues too that definitely need to be addressed here. And that brings us to my last question here, and on a little bit lighter note. And this question is for you, Hemant. Can you share an ODA or recall fun fact with our audience that they may not be aware of, but that you have learned during your work over the years?
Yeah, I have one very interesting story that I can share. And it's till this date, it feels very bizarre to me that this was the case, but there was a software update campaign that we did to a particular vehicle or fleet of vehicles. And the update was targeted to vehicles of a certain color. So that is very
Yeah.
bizarre. If you think about it, okay, all red, vehicles of this particular brand need to get a specific software update that the other colored vehicles do not. So I think we'll see some pretty interesting things over time. But one of the capabilities that we provide at Sibros is the ability to slice and dice your fleet based on any kind of static or dynamic attribute of the vehicle. And so because of that capability, it is easy to target such an update on a very limited set of vehicles. But I thought that was a pretty cool use of the technology.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for
I
sharing.
have to ask what a use case is for a single color update. Just curious.
So one of the things was that there were a couple issues, but the one I can talk to is the infotainment display was not showing the vehicle with the right
Interesting.
um, color of red, or right shade of red, let's say, and hence it was only um, for those vehicles to get updated. And of course, it was then part of a bigger rollout when the next big software update happened to the entire fleet. But in the beginning, it was just to that targeted set to make the vehicle owners less upset.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Great. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. A big thank you to you both for joining Autology.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. That's great.
And thank you to all you listeners for tuning in as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode at our etology at spglobal.com email. And you can find out much more at autotechinsight.ihsmarket.com. Don't forget to hit all the subscribe, follow, and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Etology podcasts. And we look forward to you joining us again in the next episode. Bye for now.